Thank you for joining us again for another Facebook Live interview. I'm Ericka Andersen of National Review, and today I've got author Michael Ware with me. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
It's great to be with you.
So we're talking to Michael today. He just came out with a new book called Reclaiming Hope, and just to give you a little bit of background, he worked for the Obama administration in the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So that was the faith-based office that was really continued on from what George W. Bush set up. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you guys and Obama kind of renamed it a little bit, but essentially the same office.
Right. And
so you just came out with this book, and it's really, I'll just say right off the bat that I loved it so much. Because
thank you.
I don't think you see a lot of books about the intersection of faith and politics. And for me, that's something I wrestle with every day. Background on my side of things. I'm a Christian. I've worked in politics for 10 years. I used to work for Vice President Pence. So I've been in it in the game, but sometimes it's just so hard to reconcile the two. And especially right now in such a polarizing time with the recent election and just all the issues that have come up in the past couple of years. So, before we get into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, why you decided to write it, and just how it's going so far?
Yeah, well, it's been an amazing process. I wrote Reclaiming Hope for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to provide resources from the lessons I learned, not just in the White House, but sort of at the intersection of faith and politics over the last decade in American life. Wanted to provide those lessons to the American people and others, and the church that I think is going to need them in the years ahead. And then I also wanted to provide some perspective on how faith intersected with President Obama's legacy and what faith, the role that faith played in his rise, in his presidency, and in his two campaigns.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things in the book was you really gave a window into President Obama's own spirituality, I guess, or his own Christianity. And you talk about how that wasn't really covered by the media. It was almost kind of ignored. And a lot of people were left thinking that he didn't really have a faith and it was all talk. So talk a little bit about, kind of what you saw from him and what you wrote about as far as his faith went, that as you saw it working in the White House.
Yeah, so I think our mutual friend Molly Hemingway pointed this out at some point during the president's first term, that nearly every time the president spoke about his faith, mainstream media reports would say, Obama unusually discusses his faith, as he only does rarely. Only the same story would be written, 5-6 times a year. So the president talked about his faith. He was clearly more comfortable talking about his faith at events with faith audiences or at events where he felt it was appropriate. So obviously Charleston, after the Tucson, in Newtown. But people kind of don't realize the president's first job as a community organizer was funded by the Catholic Church, funded by the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, which receives money from the church. Most of his work was working with churches on the south side of Chicago. So that was the setting for his community organizing. And so even before he embraced the Christian faith for himself, a knowledge of religious institutions was integral to him being able to do his job well. And then I sort of chart the course of, in 2004, the Democratic Party had probably the most religiously had a pretty religiously inept nominee in John Kerry. Even his own advisors would say that he lost that race in large part because of how he navigated religion issues. And yet Barack Obama, at John Kerry's invitation, went to Boston, went to the Democratic Convention, and talked about the awesome God we serve in the blue states. And in the run-up to his campaign, gave several faith-based speeches about the way that he viewed not just his personal faith, but how faith intersected with public life. And So yeah, faith played a major role. He expanded the faith-based office. He started new traditions at the White House, including the Easter prayer breakfast, which had never been done before. And so I think it's impossible to understand whether you generally support the president or oppose the president's policies and his time in office. It's impossible to understand the president's legacy separate from the role that faith played.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about how he really got a lot of pushback from other people in the administration or from people in the campaign, like kind of like telling him, stop doing all of this. And he continued to pursue it and, was able to reach those voters that probably he wouldn't have any other way. And you also talk about how John McCain didn't have very good outreach to religious voters, which, to me, that just says, Republicans were kind of taking them for granted at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Republican campaigns have outsourced their religious outreach to advocacy groups, which has its upsides. You're a degree removed. The outside groups can do things that you can't do in a campaign, but McCain's campaign, and I would say Mitt Romney's campaign, really suffered from not having a robust faith-based operation, to the extent where I was hearing from major conservative evangelical leaders who would tell me after the campaigns that they never heard from the McCain campaign at all. And these were people I was, even though they probably didn't vote for Barack Obama, they were hearing from me pretty regularly. And so yeah, there was an interesting dichotomy there.
So tell me this, it's so not interesting, but how Christians are generally kind of stereotyped as Republicans. Yeah. So how is it for you, being a Democrat, being a Christian, working with all the faith-based group? Is it kind of a weird feeling sometimes, or do you feel kind of like you get a lot of questions about that? I mean, I don't think it's weird, but It is not, I guess, the stereotype of a Christian to be a Democrat and work for Obama.
Well, and right, so that is, sometimes that could be overblown, but it is grounded in, the Democratic Party is now about a third secular or religiously unaffiliated. Democrats have been, I think, less willing to talk about faith, and so there are some things that play into that. I'll tell you, I discussed this in Reclaiming Hope. I had a pretty good sense, even before I entered, actually working vocationally in politics, that I was never going to be completely comfortable in politics or in a political party. People of faith generally won't be comfortable in a political party because we don't have the luxury or the downfall of taking our orders from a political party platform. People of faith, right. Take their marching orders from elsewhere, and so it's led to tensions. I do think. Sometimes the crisis is not that there are people who are politically homeless. The crisis is that there are so many people who think that they could ever find their home in politics. Mm-hmm. And that's a major theme of the book, which is this idea that, if just the right candidate got in place, if only there could be some tweaks here or there, then our politics would, be perfect and I would be completely comfortable. No, actually, Christians are called to be salt and light in the world, and I argue in politics. And the reason we're called to be salt and light in politics is because politics needs some salt and light.
Yeah, it's that's such a good point. And I mean, honestly, I read this book at just the right time because lately I've just been feeling so much tension between faith and politics. It's so. You wake up and you get on Facebook and your blood pressure just starts to rise. Like I actually put that filter on my Facebook that filters out politics, at least on one of my computers. I mean, I do this for a living, so I can't completely ignore it. But you make the point so many times in the book about how actually Christians are called to participate in politics and participate in government. Like, that's our duty as citizens. And you said, at one point you said, how can we, I wish I could remember, something about like, how can you be heard if you're not speaking, or like you don't have a voice?
That's right.
So I guess, what do you say to Christians who are hesitant to get involved, especially now in light of all of the, you talk in depth about the religious liberty issues, and I want to get a little bit into that, but it's kind of a scary world to walk out into a little bit right now for Christians.
Yeah, so I would argue that it is precisely at the time when these questions are being asked and when the answers seem up for grabs that Christians are called to enter the public square with joyful confidence, and contribute to helping our society find the answers. In other words, it's if we were only engaging in politics before because we felt like the victories felt inevitable, and because it was sort of a way to assert our will in a way that we felt would be affirmed, then that's a pretty self-centered way to go into politics. And I think as you see the polarization that we're having today, it's a way that a lot of people are going into politics. I argue in the book that Christianity actually offers some unique resources that help us to be other-centered when we're engaging in politics. And so we don't, if you're feeling discouraged about the direction of our political process, then that should encourage you to get more involved. Not with the expectation that your point of view will carry the day, but with the expectation that you have a point of view that, if taken up, is for the good of your neighbor, and that actually would be best for the direction of the country. And so I would just encourage people who are feeling, and unfortunately it's a lot of, I think, we're hearing it from all quarters, sort of this argument that now is the time for withdrawal and we should sort of focus on our own, and I just think that's terribly destructive. We have something positive to contribute to our politics and to society, and this should be a time of increased engagement from all well-meaning citizens, including Christians.
Yeah, I, in the moments that I do have those times where I think, why am I still doing this? Like, I've been doing this for so long. And I want to retreat, but there is something inside of me that says, like, you need to be out there doing this, because, like, if you're not doing it, then someone else is going to do it. And
that's exactly right.
Even though, like, you and I may be different political parties, I love your book so much, because I see how much that, we can come together on a lot of issues just by reading some of the things that you've said. I mean, I was actually just writing a list of, like, amazing quotes from the book. Like, you have in here, I'll just read a couple of them that really stood out to me. Christian hopes can be advanced by non-Christian sources, even government, and Christians can be confident in embracing what is good, because we know God is at work in all things. And then another great one I liked was, politics is not where you want to place your hope. We need to have a firmer ground to stand upon when engaging in politics than politics itself, which, like, to me, that stood out so much, because in so many times when I'm debating, discussing, thinking about these issues, I feel like I am trying to stand on the politics, and that's why I get so defensive and upset, when I'm trying to talk to people. And it's like, because that is not a firm ground to stand on. So how did you kind of come up with that idea? I mean, you have so many great little anecdotes in here that I would just love to hear a little more about that one.
Well, I think I understood some of this intellectually, at least, when I got to the White House and started working on presidential campaigns. But it was really the process of going through that, and in some ways the process of writing this book, that moved sort of the intellectual sort of affirmation to something that was a more deeply held conviction. And I started recognizing, especially during this 2016 campaign, just the intense spiritual harm that our politics was causing, and it made me ask questions about, why why is that? Why is our politics able to so profoundly disappoint us? And does that indicate that maybe we're going to politics to have needs met that are better met elsewhere? And so it was. I talk a little bit I have a chapter in the book on what is real hope. I mean, so kind of. I don't think I've said this anywhere, but kind of my hope for the book is to walk readers through the last decade in politics as I experienced it, but really as we all experienced it, and be able to emerge on the other side of that with a more firmly grounded hope. I mean, I think there are Christian books on politics that have a lot of niceties, but never actually confront the real earthly conflicts that are in politics. And so you read it and you say, well, that's nice, but this person actually has never had to actually deal or work in politics. And then you read political books that are so mired in practicalities and sort of political gamesmanship that they never look out to the horizon. And I wanted this book to both be honest and earnest about the political challenges that we face, but then also allow people to come out through that with an encouragement to engage and a vision for what that might look like, as opposed to reading a whole lot of muck and sort of disappointments and saying, well, I guess politics is not for me. It's not worthwhile, because my experience is that politics is worthwhile. It is important.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. You talk also in the book a lot about, I mean, it's clear that you are a huge fan of President Obama, and you worked for him. That makes sense. But you do talk a little bit about his the evolution on gay marriage and that issue, and I think it's almost, I don't know if you agree with me or not on this, but it seems like after that happened, that's kind of when almost like the assault began on Christians in a way. And I personally have the hardest time with this because so many are called names like bigots and all of these things. And it's, I guess, do you have any thoughts on how Christians should deal with that kind of name calling when truly they're out there, say they are involved in politics? And that is such a deterrent when you go out there and you're called these names and it's not what you are. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I think first we have to recognize the motives behind it. And frankly, it's the same. They're trying to constrain the conversation and make it seem like a decision has been made that hasn't been made yet. Mm-hmm. It was the same type of approach that, frankly, this casting of people out as outside of the mainstream didn't just come up in the last 3 or 4 years. It's a political tactic that is based on again a politics of belonging, of defining our political views as the primary determinant of whether we're an American or not, or whether we're sort of acceptable or not. And I would just urge people to receive those things and question your own heart and question sort of your own views, and make sure that you're not being offensive for the sake of making offense. But after you check your own views, then again, you need to have a joyful confidence in engaging even with those who disagree with you, and being humble and kind and generous towards them, even if it's not something that's reciprocated. If you believe that what you're standing up for is good for not just yourself and your own interests, but for their interests as well, for the national interests. I know it's been these debates have the intent is to make it so that there's these debates are so divisive and so isolating that no one other than the extremes want to participate in them. And what I would encourage people to do is to understand what the game plan is, and recognize that your voice can actually help us find a better way than this constant demonization that takes place.
I love that joyful confidence thing, and I think that's something I'm going to try to incorporate into my life, because I struggle with that. I guess with both sides of it sometimes, but I think that's such a great approach, and that goes back to, you're not standing on politics. You're standing on something. Your hope is in something more than politics, and that's why you can have that joyful confidence.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about something a little more fun, which, of course, you have this great story in the book of running into President Obama before he was president. You were at a conference and you came early on accident, and then he was in the hallway, but then you asked, you're like, I want to work for you someday, and you talk about how persistent you were in getting back in touch with them, and it really paid off. What gave you that kind of like persistence that you were able to just keep trying until you got what you were looking for?
In some ways it was, I really didn't know any better. It was this amazing coincidence and this sort of providential moment where, like you said, I was supposed to be at the hotel. I had the dates wrong, and I ended up crossing paths with the next president in the lobby of a hotel a week before he announces that he's going to run for president. What I knew was I had followed his career since 2003, 2004, and I knew I wanted to work for him, and so I not just met him, but met several of his staffers, and I was just persistent. And sometimes I'd drop them an email, just reminding them I was alive, and then other times I'd send an email with a few lines on what I thought they were doing wrong, or how what they were doing could be improved.
You're like, let me, I can help you.
And so there was really a kind of presumption behind it, but I think there was also recognition that I wasn't entitled to anything. These are very busy people, and they're not going to have me on the top of their minds. If we just met once in a hotel lobby, they don't know me, and so it was like if I really want to do this, then in a respectful way, in a way that doesn't sort of obviously there's a way to overdo it, but if there's a way that I could stay on their radar, so that if there's a moment that comes in the middle of the campaign where they think, wow, we could use some extra help on this stuff, that they might think of me, and fortunately that was part of what happened.
And so you were on the campaign, and then did they ask you to join the administration, like, from there? Yeah,
well, so I did the 2008 campaign, and then I was asked to work on the transition. So there are a whole range of religious functions and responsibilities around the inauguration, and so I worked on the inaugural committee in 2009, and then joined the White House just a week or two after the inauguration, when the president signed the executive order sort of charting his course for the faith-based office.
Yeah, and you also have a great scene in there where I think it was inauguration 2008, where you're standing with Martin Luther King III. And it's like, is this real life? Like, what's happening?
It was, unbelievable. I was, when you're both tired, but also your adrenaline is running. So I was definitely in that state. I hadn't slept much in the previous 72 hours. And so I kind of had to do a double take and make sure that I was, but it was sort of all of my responsibilities had had ended and I had nothing left to do. And so I just watched the parade route, and I looked to my left, and Martin Luther King III was there, which was, obviously a
monumental.
brings some historical reflections to mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is probably maybe a question that people ask you a lot, but like being in the White House, I know you on the podcast I heard you on, you guys were talking about the West Wing, which of course everyone's going to reference the West Wing. I'm in the middle of watching it, again for the second time. But they say in the show, and this is probably true, that like it never gets old, like seeing it, being in the middle of it. Is that the feeling that you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that we talked about that. Some, especially the younger staffers, talked about that scene. It's in the first few episodes of the West Wing, and it never does. You can never get used to working in the White House. Now, right? Certainly, at the end of the day, it's your job, and it's not like you're walking around with stars in your eyes.
Yeah, you gotta still.
You have 16 hours of 16-hour work days, but the weight of the office, the idea that the White House is a living museum is something that's evident every day you work there, and you'll walk through the West Wing lobby, and at any point in time there might be the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, and Miss America, and a Boy Scout who's the National Boy Scout of the Year, and just this amazing sort of not just collection of Americans, but really collection of the world of incredible people, some of note, some that are little known, but somehow they got on the White House's radar or had to meet. And so you'd walk through the West Wing lobby and just see this incredible assortment of people that wouldn't be in the same room in any other room.
Right.
It was only the White House that could bring them together in such a unique way.
Yeah, I have been into the White House press room. I haven't been into, I went to the White House Christmas tour, but it's not really the same thing as working there like you did. But even, I have to say, even working for members of Congress and being on the House floor and just being in the Capitol, like, it is kind of a magical feeling to be there. I mean, and you're like, they're just regular people, and they're elected, we put them there. But there is something just kind of magical about being in Washington, D.C. and being in those buildings and knowing all the things that have happened in them.
Well, right, because it and this is something we need to remind ourselves as, celebrity culture increasingly affects our politics. But it's not about them. I mean, right? So the president changes every 4-8 years.
Right.
It's really about the office. It's really about the institution. And so even if there definitely is a culturation that sort of takes place. You get used to seeing the junior senator from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And the first time you see him, it's like, whoa, and then you get kind of sick of him.
Yeah. You start to realize, like, that congressman is really annoying.
That's right. Exactly right. But it's the institution and all of the weight that carries. It's so much bigger than the personalities and the people that occupy them for a limited amount of time. That's what's really, really kind of moving about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that kind of, you talk about in the book. I had this written down about people seeing politicians as a source of hope, and which of course, the name of your book, Reclaiming Hope. And how that's not the right thing, which, Obama, of course, like his whole campaign in 2008 was about hope. And I feel like people probably lifted him up to that in maybe an unrealistic fashion. But I also see the same thing with some of the Trump voters. And I guess you see that in every single election cycle is the presidential candidate comes in and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to fix that and this. And that's where the disappointment comes in, because
Yeah.
reality's hitting big time right now. Hello, Russia. But it's always going to hit. And you talk about, give us just a little description of the difference between the 2008 and 2012 campaigns. Like, those were very different because reality had set in.
Yeah. Well, so what I say is, you can, when your hope is in the right place, you can hope for a whole range of things. It's when we misplace the source of our hope that then we can get misdirected and disappointed in some pretty destructive ways. To your question about, the 2008 campaign was all about aspiration, open doors, the idea, even if rhetorically, that we were going after every voter. And even operationally, especially in the faith outreach sort of realm, there wasn't a voter that was off limits. 2012 was a much more closed, limited sort of campaign that was that was about what our politics in general has become about, which is about turning out your base and trying to get to 50 plus 1 or 270 in a way that is really about who can you target, as opposed to advancing the most inclusive, broad vision that you have for the country. Now, I was honored to work on the 2012 campaign. There are reasons why the strategy was different from 2008 to 2012 that are genuinely tied to the political circumstances on the ground.
They'd have to be different.
Right, but it was a very it was just a different kind of campaign.
Yeah, and in his last term, you talk about, and I'm sure it was probably hard to write about some of the things that you wrote about being disappointed in the way he wasn't really able to overcome the partisanship issue and the religious liberty and things to do with abortion. Yeah. It seemed to me, that he wanted to do those things, but there were so many people around that were against it, pushing back. I have to mention this. One of my favorite lines in the book is when you say, "It was great to check off my bucket list, work on a speech with the President of the United States," in which he quotes C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I was like, that's awesome.
That was a good one.
So President Obama did give a speech in which C.S. Lewis is quoted. So that couldn't have been a bad thing.
One point for Narnia.
Yes, it was awesome. But talking about that failure to do that, do you think had he kind of pushed more forcefully on some of these things, tried to push back and say, no, I want to do this, or he does propose a restriction on late-term abortion, do you think that would have been a negative for him, or he wouldn't have been able to get elected in 2012 or something like that?
No, I disagree, and I think we saw this play out in 2016, where there was this presumption that the turnout of the base is directly proportional to how obstinate and sort of extreme you could be, and on the Democratic side, we saw that wasn't the case with wide swaths of our base, of the folks we were counting on. And I think the president, a couple things. First, the buck stops with him. And so the idea that there were staff that were possibly less excited about finding common ground with pro-life Americans than he expressed in his Notre Dame speech, there's a practical element to that, but again, at the end of the day, I was there. All staff were only there because we were political appointees. The president asked us to be there, and so they were there for a reason. But yes, had the president spent more political capital following up on Notre Dame, or had he had the administration taken a different approach to the HHS mandate out of the gate, as opposed to staking what is a position that the Supreme Court rejected, that they've had to revise many times, then yes, I think our polarization would have been more eased than it is now. I think he would have been able to make more progress reaching out to Americans who opposed him. And it wasn't. Those weren't chapters I necessarily enjoyed writing, but it was important to make clear that at particular points over the course of the Obama administration, decisions were made not to ease partisan conflict, but to stoke it. Mm-hmm. And so the sort of the positive side of that is all of this talk now that Barack Obama did everything perfectly to heal our partisan divides, and if Barack Obama couldn't do it, then clearly no one ever could, and so we should just give up on finding common ground and having a politics that works better. That's not true. I walk through specific cases where I show why and how that's not true, which gives me hope that we haven't fully tested the notion of what it looks like to have a presidency that doesn't seek to slice and dice the country and pit blue America versus red America.
How do you, being in the Democratic Party, deal with the hostility to some of the faith issues that you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's it can be frustrating. I think something I write in the book is that actually what we need are Democrats who are faithful, who are proud to call themselves Democrats, but are willing to act in the party and test the party on some of its presumptions. And we need the same types of religious folks in the Republican Party. I know a lot of Christians who are uncomfortable in today's Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And again, we sort of started off the conversation on this point, but the point is not that we're going to be comfortable. Actually, if you feel completely in line with your political party,
that's bad.
You might want to ask yourself what and who you're being faithful to. So there were definitely difficult moments where when the Democratic Party for the first time in 40 years puts on its platform the federal funding of abortion, that's a difficult thing for a lot of Democrats to process and go through. But I am much more comfortable being at odds with my political party on certain issues than I would be sort of ceding my conscience to whatever the party platform drafters decide to draft up in every 4 years.
Yeah, there's definitely issues on both sides. I mean, I love that point. Like, if you're like, I'm, happy 100% Republican or vice versa, like, it's, there's something you're probably missing and need to explore in your own mind about it. So, and then I have a couple lines from the end of the book. Let me see here if I can, well, I think this is like a main one, which is our goal is not victory, but faithfulness. And so you're saying, even if your issue, the Supreme Court rules against your issue, even if your candidate loses, it's not your job to make that happen. It's your job to do the best that you can in that confident joy that you talk about, and just be faithful. And I guess that's really the message of your book overall, right?
Well, yeah, right. So it's being faithful in politics doesn't mean winning. I mean,
right.
I think we sort of have this idea that Jesus is confused about our political system. that it's like the one area of life that he just doesn't get, and so we sort of pretend as though sort of faithfulness does not apply here because, but no, it does apply. What doesn't apply is this idea that we are responsible for the outcomes of politics, because Politics is all about pluralistic decision making, and I write about not to refer, but in Jeremiah 29. God has a message for the exiles in Babylon, and the message isn't, go tell them all what heathens they are, and try and establish, citywide law about, proclaiming me as the one and only God. No, it's seek the peace and the welfare of the city in which you've been planted, because if they prosper, you too will prosper. It was a message not of domination, but one of service, one of other-centered service, and that's the kind of approach that Christians can carry with them into politics. Again, not something aimed towards domination or their own political power, but how to use the influence that they've been given for the good and flourishing of others.
Yeah, and one more line, because I wrote so many down. I'm going to read one more. You wrote, a spirit of humility also allows us to act without the presumption that we have all the answers. And yeah, I really resonated with that, just because I do have like strong political beliefs, but I also don't assume that I'm always 100% right. And so sometimes I have trouble being confident in some of my opinions, but in a way that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. I talk about this sort of dual side of humility, which is humility means that we don't presume that we're right, that we're the final authority, but oftentimes that's used to sort of tell people, well, if you're not 100% sure that what you're saying is right, then you better get out altogether. You better get out of politics altogether. When I try to argue that humility actually says that we're not the deciders in politics, and we shouldn't put so much moral burden on our political participation that humility causes us to withdraw. Humility, the sort of the courageous side of humility, actually means that even if we know that we might not be right, we do the best that we can with the information we have, knowing that it all doesn't rest on us.
Right.
And so I think that's pretty important, especially at a time again when there's this major pull towards political withdrawal that I don't think is helpful.
Yeah, and well, like what you said, it doesn't depend on us. Well, that can be said of so many other things in life as a Christian. So many circumstances in our lives that we can't control. It goes for politics. It goes for all kinds of things. So I think that's a great lesson. Well, I could probably continue talking to you for like 2 hours, because here's the book, everybody, just so you can see it. Reclaiming Hope. You can get it on Amazon. But I'll just show you. I kind of just like marked this whole thing up. Like you can see my red writing, because I was just reading it so intently. It was such a book for me, and I've been telling everyone on social media, like, if you're a Christian and you're involved in politics, you should read this. Even if you're not, you should read this to just get a better understanding of President Obama, for one thing. I think it was really insightful and interesting to read about him, but just also where people of faith are coming from as they are working in politics. Do you know anything about? I assume there's a faith-based office in the Trump administration. Are you aware?
There is every expectation that Trump will continue the faith-based office. How the Trump administration envisions the office working under their administration is a cause of concern.
Right.
So no announcements have been made. He actually didn't. I don't believe he mentioned the faith-based office at all during his National Prayer Breakfast speech a couple weeks ago. So a lot of us are kind of in wait-and-see mode. If the office continues the focus of the Bush and the Obama administrations on resourcing the faith community and the nonprofit community to serve those in need, then it can do tremendous work. If the office becomes a place for religious leaders who support the administration's policy initiatives to be propped up, then it will do great damage to the office.
Well, I hope that they get themselves on track. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I hope everyone buys this book, reads this book. I hope that your sales do really well, and let us know if we can do anything else for you.
Thank you. I just love this conversation. Thank you for engaging the book. Would love to engage others about the book on Twitter and Facebook. Y'all can find me.
Yeah, we're going to post all the links and everything just right above this video. As soon as we end this, I'll have all the information up there, so people should be able to find it.
Great. Hey, thank you so much. It was great to be with you. And I'll just say, obviously, I don't agree with the National Review on everything, but gosh, y'all have just been have made me hopeful about the future of conservatism over the last couple of years, and you especially, Ericka. And so thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking today as I was reading something that we had published, and I was thinking, I'm really glad that I work for a place that does stick to their convictions, and it's not dependent on who's in office. So
that's right.
I appreciate that. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.